Mr. Heavyweight Boxing today.
Hey, what's up, man? This is Chris, the Nightmare Ariola, and you're watching Mr. Boxing today.
It's your boy Big Baby Miller here. Listen, we knocking out all bums. First gonna be Dylan White, if it's gonna be Joseph Parker, but you know who got the story right? Mr. Boxing Today. You check him out. He got all the latest news on the heavyweight division. And if you don't know me, you soon will, because I'm kicking everybody ass.
What's the deal? So I have a question. Who had the better championship win? Leon Spinks or James Corbet? Gentleman Jim. Spinks won the title from Ali in 1978. Corbet won the title from John L. Sullivan in 1892. And I'm only talking about these guys only up until fight night when they won the title. So nothing after, just up until fight night when they won the title. I'm going to start off with Spinks. He was, prior to boxing, professionally, he won Olympic gold medal at 178 pounds. His amateur career, he was 178 wins with 7 losses with 133 knockouts. Going into the Ali fight, he was a 10-1 underdog, and he was a 24-year-old guy. He was 6 wins, 0 losses, and he had the 1 draw. His best wins, in my opinion, were the Regahetti fight. He was the Italian heavyweight champion. He was the Italy heavyweight champion. 27-0, so he beat him, and then he beat Pedro Augusto. Augusto was a guy, I remember that's the guy Foreman fought, and Foreman knocked him down about 5 different times, man. And it's funny because Spinks was able to knock him out 1 round. That fight is on YouTube, and I also seen Floyd Patterson fight Augusto, and that was a good fight. He was, he was troubling Floyd Patterson. You can argue that Floyd probably won all the rounds up until the cut. The stoppage, I think it was around the 5th or 6th round. But Augusto was giving him all he can handle, man. He was kind of like a poor man's Joe Frazier, kind of want to get right up in your chest. And it was funny watching him get right up in Foreman's grill, and Foreman had to throw everything at him to knock him out, man. But Spinks knocked him out cold. You know what I mean? I think he lifted his head up kind of like at count 9 or 10, but Spinks laid his ass out. And it was funny to see Spinks lay him out like that, and Foreman had to knock him down multiple times. So it's kind of weird seeing that. And then he had to draw with Scott Ledoux, a Minnesota native. Ledoux was a decent journeyman. He was a journeyman. He was a decent guy, He had beat Larry Middleton and Ron Standard, and he had the draw with Norton, even knocked Norton down and knocked Lyle down, and lost to, Foreman and Bobbick twice. So Ledoux, he was a good journeyman, but that was his draw, okay? Then Ali going into the first fight with Spinks. He was 36 years old. On fight night, Spinks was outweighed by 27 pounds. He came in at 197. Ali came in at 224. This wasn't the same Ali. 1978, that's not the same Ali, and we all know that. It's a downswing of his career. After this fight, Ali fought, 3 more times? The one against Berbick and Holmes, which he should not have been in the ring, especially the Berbick fight. And then Ali came back and beat Spinks in a rematch, but definitely wasn't the same Ali, So we go over to gentleman James Corbet. With him, prior to turning professional. Now, mind you, this is a different time, okay? We're talking about the 1880s, 1890s. This is a whole different time, man. He came here to America. He went to the West Coast, San Francisco, and he was they put him as a boxing instructor at the Olympic Athletic Club. Prestigious club for those days, one of a kind for those days. He was a kid that was in school and got kicked out of school around the age of 14. Just got into too many fights. So he didn't have an amateur career as far as, having a tally record. Not that I seen, what I'm saying? If you find some other information, leave it on the, leave it in the comment section. But I didn't see any amateur fights. He was the instructor. I mean, he could have put some amateur fights together and won a whole bunch of, fights, but he was good enough to be their boxing instructor, so he must have had some type of hands, you know what I mean? And back then, amateur was looked at as a higher level than pros. Turning pro was almost criminal. Well, it was criminal. You know what I mean? It was very criminal back then. The venues were kept secret, and if the police caught wind of a fight, they would go break the fight up. Most of you know this stuff, you know what I mean? So it was criminal to be a professional. Amateur was more like a gentleman's type of thing, winner, loser, gloves on. It's more of a gentleman's, footwork, hit and not get hit, the sweet science, And Corbett was credited for that. Some people think that he shouldn't have been credited for it, but he's one of the guys that is credited for that type of style with the Marcus of Queensberry rules. You know, even if you don't think he's the first, he is one of the guys that, you know, should be credited, which he is. So going into his fight with Sullivan, he was 8 wins, 2 draws, and 2 no contests. His best wins, you know, he had 4 Hall of Fame fights before he even fought Sullivan. The 2 against Joe Troyniski, and then the win over Jake Kilrain, and then the draw or no contest with Peter Jackson. That Peter Jackson fight, I've read and seen different documentaries. I've heard 2 different accounts. I've heard that Peter Jackson was pretty much getting the best of him for pretty much all the rounds. Then I heard another account where the first 30 rounds were even, and then the last, you know, 31 rounds were so boring that people were falling asleep, people were leaving, so on and so forth, because both guys were tired. You know, I think the fight went like 3 hours, something like that, 3 or 4 hours. So I've heard different accounts. It's kind of like, who do you want to believe? But at the same time, those 61 rounds is still 61 rounds against Peter Jackson, a Hall of Fame fighter. And same for Peter Jackson, you know, and Jackson was ducked by John L. Sullivan. We all know that Sullivan was not going to fight anybody that wasn't, you know, white, you know, and so he wouldn't give Jackson a shot. Ironic, though, that Corbett gave Jackson a shot. You know, he knew that, man, if I beat Jackson, then Sullivan would have to take the fight with me. He's going to have to fight with me. You know what I mean? And he went there and he showed a good showing. So it all depends on what you believe. Do you believe that Jackson whooped his ass for 1 rounds, or do you think it was an even fight and then the last 30 were even also because there was no action? You know, either way, it's 61 rounds. Jake Kilrain, like I said, Kilrain actually fought Sullivan for the last bare knuckle heavyweight championship fight, and that was a grueling, epic fight. 75 rounds. You know, so that was a good fight that he had bare knuckle, Jake Kilrain. But then he lost to, you know, Corbett beat him. And then the fights with Joe Troyniski, that I guess one fight was stopped by the police, and then about 5 or 6 days later, they had another fight, and Corbett won that, knocked him out in the 27th round. You know, so, and then it's funny because Corbett, when he turned pro, he went under the name Jim Dillon. You know what I mean? Because he would have been expelled from the Olympic Athletic Club had they, you know, known that he turned pro. Because once you turn pro, you can't go back to amateur. So he, you know, turned pro without them knowing, under a alias. You know what I mean? But Sullivan, you know, so now you look at the champions that they beat. Sullivan, he was 38-0, you know, with the 1 draw, and then he bare knuckles championed in the fights he did win with gloves. They were saying he was the best fighter with gloves also. You know, some of his it's just legendary reading some of the things that his accomplishments, man. Knocking guys down 50 to 60 times in one fight. Knocking guys down, you know, 3 or 4 times in 30 seconds. You know, beating guys in the first round, second round. Knocking guys unconscious after the first punch. I mean, almost cartoonish reading some of this stuff, man. You know, but he had took 3 years off, you know, so he came into that fight with Corbett taking 3 years off. In his 3 years, you know, he was making movies, he was drinking whatever he wanted, eating whatever he wanted. I'm pretty sure he was fornicating with whoever he wanted to, doing whatever he wanted to do, man. You know, not living the lifestyle of a fighter, especially not Corbett, who's training his feet to fight, training his feet, not just his hands. He was training his feet, moving, dancing, moving. You know, so 3 years of Corbett doing that, then fighting guys like Peter Jackson and so on and so forth, while, you know, Sullivan, who was known as the man, he was the man back then, you know, he was not doing anything, you know what I mean? And he was avoiding black fighters and all types of different situations, but he was the man, you know what I mean? Sullivan was the man. He was undefeated. Didn't nobody beat him. You know what I mean? I got to give the man credit for that. But going into the fight, he was 34 years old. Ali was 36 years old going into his fight. Sullivan also had a weight advantage on Corbett of 34 pounds. Like I said, Ali had advantage on Spinks, 27 pounds. Before the 3 years before the fight Sullivan had with Corbett, he didn't fight at all. The 3 years before the first fight with Spinks, Ali had fought Webner, Lyle, Shavers, Frazier, Young, Norton. He was beating all those guys, you know what I mean? So you can, you know, we know that that wasn't the same Ali, and Ali started to, you know, you could tell it wasn't the same. His speech, he just, you know, his motor skills just wasn't the same, man. But you can also argue that Sullivan wasn't the same. And we know Ali's condition got worse and worse, and we know that. But you can also argue that Sullivan wasn't the same fighter either. You know what I mean? So I would have to tip the scale to James Corbett. His win was probably better than Spinks' win just because of the mystique and everything. Maybe this isn't fair, but just from the mystique, I mean, he took the man's O, and he also took Jay Kilrain's O too. But you know, he took Sullivan's O, and he ended the mystique of Sullivan. I was, you know, I've seen documentaries, and I also read about when Corbett, you know, the fight went 21 rounds. It was Marcus of Queensberry rule, but it was, you know, fight to the finish. So it went 21 rounds, and he was setting Sullivan up, dancing, moving on him. Sullivan was getting pissed off that he wouldn't, you know, stand and take a punch like a man. You know what I mean? But and then Corbett was just slicing him up. From what I've heard, he broke his nose with a jab. You know, also heard that he hurt Joy Triniski with a hard jab too. But you know, he broke Sullivan's nose with a jab, and then he finished him off. You know what I mean? Whereas Spinks, you know, went tooth and nail with Ali. He definitely out hustled him. You know, but it wasn't to this type of severity like that, in my opinion. You know, he wasn't bloodied and beaten like that. You know what I mean? But so the Spinks and Ali fight, that went 15 rounds. The Corbett and, you know, Sullivan fight went 21 rounds. You know, but it was fight to the finish, man. And there's no way you can overlook a fight to the finish match. I don't overlook that. You know, but I'm gonna go with James Corbett. I think his win was better, man, because at that time people knew Ali was on his way out. He wasn't the same fighter. Sullivan wasn't the same fighter, but he hadn't lost yet. Nobody's seen him lose. Ali had lost to Norton, and he had lost to Frazier. You know, he had lost. Sullivan, we still haven't seen him lose, even though he wasn't the same fighter. He was sitting out, you know what I mean? But nobody had seen him lose. Nobody seen him get his ass kicked or knocked the fuck out. And for Corbett to do that and put it into a myth and a legend, you know what I mean? That, to me, is higher than what Spinks was able to accomplish. You know, both these guys, as far as their wins and losses, Spinks was 6-0. Corbett was 8-0. Although, like I said, he had 4 fights against Hall of Famers, you know what I mean, going into the Sullivan fight. You know, but I think his win was more impressive because he knocked him out, because he, you know, sliced him up and broke his nose and was out, you know, just dominating Sullivan pretty much every damn round. He was just dominating the dude. You know, and I guess if we was to go back and watch it, you know, if he wasn't really doing much, you would think, well, shit, if Sullivan was coming forward, at least trying to initiate the fight. You know what I mean? But from what I've read different accounts, man, I've read that, you know, Corbett was just dancing on him, you know, winning majority of the rounds, but sliced him up, knocked him out, dominated him, man. You know what I mean? And I guess, you know, when Sullivan went down, from story goes, is when the ref was counting, when it got to about the count of 2, the whole crowd went silent. And it was almost like the crowd they were just in shock that he was being counted out. You know what I mean? That he was even being counted out like this. It was just, everybody was in shock. The boxing world was in shock. The people that were there were in shock. The promoters, the fans that were there, everybody was in shock, man. So, and everybody was in shock that Spinks went in there and beat Ali, but it was the way that Corbett did it, and it was the way Sullivan was viewed at the time. Ali wasn't viewed like Sullivan was viewed. He was looked at as Ali, the greatest, the man, but people knew he was on his way out, knew he was slowing down, knew that there was, you know, fighters coming up. But he was the champion, you know what I mean? And Sullivan was coming back to defend his you know, his legend. You know what I mean? And the first heavyweight championship fight under Marcus of Queensberry rules. I'm going to go with James Corbett for this one, man. I think his win over Sullivan is a little bit better than Spinks' win over Muhammad Ali. Just my opinion. I'm curious to hear you guys' take on it, man. YTBC, I'm out.